woke up to the sound of my own son asking who gets my house. When I look back, that was the moment everything changed. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. The room was dim, washed in that pale hospital glow where nothing has a shadow and everything feels softer than it should. I didn't move. I didn't breathe any louder than the machines allowed. My eyes stayed closed, but my hearing, my sense of presence felt sharper than ever. The voices were close. Too close. My son's voice had always carried a hint of impatience, a kind of quiet ambition that I used to call drive. But that night, standing beside what he believed was my unconscious body, his tone carried something else entirely. Look, if the doctors are right, we need to decide what happens next, especially with the house, he said. That was Mark strategic, even when whispering. Beside him, another voice answered, smoother, colder, threaded with calculation. Sophie, we can't wait until the last minute. The market's good, and decisions have to be made before anything gets complicated. Before anything gets complicated, the irony was almost laughable if I'd had the strength to laugh. They were speaking as if I were already gone, as if I had become some administrative inconvenience. They needed to rearrange before dinner. The beeping behind me echoed in slow intervals. Steady but sharp, each one marking a second I wished I wasn't hearing this. And just as quietly, another set of footsteps entered the room, lighter, nervous, Emma, my daughter. Her presence felt like a soft blanket in a freezing room. Can we not do this here? She whispered. He's right there. Can't hear us, Sophie replied. The certainty in her voice. It was a sentence by itself, but she was wrong. I heard everything. Emma stepped closer, and through the thin slit of my nearly shut eyelids, a shape passed near me, her silhouette, shoulders tight with worry. She brushed her fingers near my hand, not touching yet, just hovering the way someone does when they're afraid the slightest movement might break what's left. Nurse. Clara entered a moment later, her steps confident, a contrast to the tension filling the room. Too many voices in here, she said softly. He needs rest. Mark was quick to soften his tone. We were just discussing arrangements. Family things. Clara didn't respond, but I felt her gaze on me, lingering a little longer than a nurse's routine check required. Something in my breathing must have changed. Shift I couldn't control. I wondered if she sensed it. When they stepped back from the bed, the room seemed to breathe with me. The air felt warmer, as if my awareness had heated the space. Their conversation continued in hushed tones near the door. Plans, options. Words that sounded more like negotiations than concern. I stayed still, perfectly still. Because in that moment, silence was power, and I needed information more than I needed comfort. Later that night, when the hall grew quiet and the lights dimmed further, Clara returned. She adjusted a few controls near the bed and looked at the monitor. My heart rate had climbed barely, but enough to be recorded. She tore a narrow strip from the machine, a small paper printout, showing the spy can tucked it into her pocket. I couldn't see her face clearly, but her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. I know you can hear them, she said. I'll keep an eye on things. That was the first moment of safety I felt when she left. The room fell into that thick hospital silence broken only by the hum of the heating vent and the faint rhythm of machines. I replayed every word I'd heard, every sentence, every intention folded neatly inside their discussion of what happens next. I'd raised Mark to be capable, responsible, independent. I thought he was ready for leadership, for trust. But hearing him divide my life while I was still lying in that bed alive, aware listening was like having the floor shift beneath me without warning. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sometimes the quietest words are the sharpest. As the night deepened, I kept my breathing even. I knew I needed patience, steady thoughts, a clear mind. If they believed I was unconscious, then observation was my only advantage. What they didn't know was that I was already awake to them. Awake to their plans, awake to a truth I had ignored for too long. By the time dawn began to soften the edges of the room, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't about recovery anymore. It was about discovering who my family had become when they thought, couldn't hear. And by the next chapter, I would learn just how far they were willing to go. I learned more about my family in 1 hour of silence than in 10 years of dinners. When I look back, that was the moment I stopped being naive. Morning light doesn't enter a hospital room the way it enters a home. It comes filtered cold, symmetrical, like it has already passed through 3 different layers of glass and caution. When I opened my eyes just a fraction, the door to my room stood half open, exactly the way it had been the night before. Half-open doors used to mean someone checking in. Now they meant something else. People checking what they could take. I kept my lashes low, just a thin slit of vision. Mark was standing by the window this time, arms folded across his chest. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the wall clock, as if the seconds owed him something. Sophie stood beside him with a folder tucked under her arm. She always held folders the way some people hold handbags protected, close to her body, full of things she didn't want anyone else to see. "I talked to the mortgage consultant," she whispered. "He said the sooner we list it, the better. List it. The house I built with my own hands. The house where Mark grew up. They spoke of it like it was a tool, something to flip, rearrange, or discard." Mark exhaled sharply. "We can't do anything until the doctor signs off, and Emma will cause trouble. She's too emotional about him." Sophie didn't argue. She rarely did, not with words, at least. Her strength was in her subtleties. Her tone, her phrasing, her ability to make her intentions sound like concern. The door clicked slightly as Emma pushed it open from the hallway. Her face was pale, eyes tired from a night I knew she hadn't slept through. She looked at me first, then quickly shifted her gaze back to them. "What are you two planning now?" she asked. "Nothing," Sophie replied too quickly. "We're trying to be practical." "About what?" Emma stepped closer. "He's still here. He's still alive." Mark rubbed his forehead, a gesture he used whenever he wanted to appear burdened. "We're trying to think ahead. Someone has to." There was a silence. Not an empty one, a charged one. Emma's voice softened. "Not like this. Not behind his back. Behind my back." The words hit me harder than the illness had. Nurse Clara entered with her calm, unshakable energy. She tapped lightly on the monitor, checked the 4-line, and straightened the sheet near my shoulder. I stayed still, breathing softly. "Visitor log is getting long today," she murmured. "Is that a problem?" Sophie asked. Clara's eyes lifted, steady and unbothered. "No, but everything gets recorded. Who comes in? Who goes out?"
"What time?"
"It's protocol." A subtle pause followed, just long enough for Sophie to understand the subtext. Clara stepped out, but not before glancing once more toward my face. She knew, or at least suspected. After she left, the conversation resumed at the doorway. The voices low enough that they must have thought I couldn't hear, but the half-open door was a detail they underestimated. "It all depends on the doctor," Mark said. "If he says Dad won't recover fully, then power of attorney." Emma interrupted sharply. "Absolutely not. You don't understand what needs to be done." "I understand more than you think." Her voice didn't rise, but the firmness in it was unmistakable. "I'm not letting either of you take advantage of him." "Take advantage?" Sophie repeated, stunned. "Emma, come on. We're trying to help." "Then try helping by waiting." Their footsteps moved toward the hallway. I listened as Sophie whispered something I couldn't fully make out, something about timing and documents. The word documents made the back of my neck tense. When they finally left the room, Emma sat beside me. The chair creaked softly under her weight. She reached out and gently touched the back of my hand. Not enough to reveal that I was awake, just enough to let her presence settle into the space. "Dad," she whispered, "I hope you're not hearing any of this. I hope you're resting." But I was hearing everything, and her voice was the only thing that didn't feel like a threat. The door moved again, a few millimeters. Wind from the hallway, or someone pausing outside. The half-open space had become a frame for truths I hadn't asked for. Later, When the nurse returned, she clipped a printed sheet onto the end of my bed. A visitor log names, timestamps, signatures. 3 columns of reality, evidence, proof that intentions weren't imagined. They were documented as the day went on. I understood something quietly, painfully. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the start of a plan, and half-open doors would reveal all of it. Piece by piece, by the time the lights softened again that evening, I felt a certainty settle inside me, a heavy, calm one. If I stayed silent long enough, I would learn exactly what they were capable of. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard my son lower his voice outside the room. When people think you're unconscious, they let their real intentions slip. Morning had settled into the hospital like a quiet agreement machines humming, doors whispering open and shut, footsteps measured and cautious. I remained still, my eyes closed to slits so thin they might as well have been shadows. At this point, silence wasn't just strategy. It was survival. The door to my room wasn't fully closed. It hadn't been since yesterday. That half-inch gap, that slim beam of hallway light, had become my window into truths I never expected to hear. Just beyond it, Mark's voice carried that familiar, practiced tone, polite when needed, persuasive when convenient. "Doctor, we just want to make sure we're making the best decision," he said. Dr. Lewis replied evenly, the way someone speaks when they've learned not to let emotions interfere. "Your father's condition is improving. Slowly, but steadily. And long-term." Mark asked too quickly. "Long-term." The word sat in my chest like a cold stone. "It's early to determine anything long-term," Dr. Lewis continued. "Neurological recovery varies person to person." Sophie stepped in, her voice soft but sharp. "We're concerned he won't be able to manage things on his own. Decisions, finances, the house." I could almost imagine Dr. Lewis raising an eyebrow at that last word. He was nobody's fool. "I appreciate your concerns," he said. "But your father is not in a condition that warrants transferring decision-making authority to anyone else. Not at this time." The silence that followed was heavier than their voices. I could feel the disappointment radiating through the half-open door. Mark had expected compliance. Sophie had expected persuasion. Neither got what they came for. Seconds later, the door opened fully, and they walked in with the doctor behind them. I kept my breaths even, slow, rhythmic, anchored by the soft beep of the heart monitor beside me. Dr. Lewis stepped closer. I heard the familiar click of his pen and the faint scratch of his writing on the chart clipped to the bed. "He's stabilizing," he said. "And last night's readings show improvement." "I'll be increasing his therapy plan this afternoon, that quick?" Sophie asked, trying to mask the annoyance in her tone. Dr. Lewis didn't even look up. "Recovery isn't linear, Mrs. Hart, but progress is progress." Emma entered the room just then, carrying a paper cup of tea that was still steaming. Her relief at seeing the doctor was obvious. Her shoulders softened, her expression warmed. "How is he today?" she asked. "Better than yesterday," Dr. Lewis said. "Your father's readings show responsiveness." Responsiveness. A single word that almost made my pulse jump. If Mark and Sophie noticed the small spike on the monitor, they didn't show it. Dr. Lewis placed the chart back onto its hook, with a quiet snap, the type of sound that ends a discussion. Even when the words don't. "I'll check on him again later. Try to keep the room calm for now." The moment he stepped out, Mark walked over to the end of my bed. I felt his presence more than I saw it. He cleared his throat. "So," he murmured, "the doctor thinks you're doing better. That complicates things. Complicates. Not helps. Not reassures. Complicates." Sophie leaned closer. "We need to be careful. We can't push too fast." They both spoke like someone planning logistics, not caring for a recovering father. Emma stayed near my head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she studied my face. "You two need to stop," she whispered. "He's still here. He's still fighting." Sophie gave her a tight smile. "We're just trying to plan ahead." Emma didn't answer. Her silence had its own kind of honesty. A few minutes later, Clara returned to check the monitors. She adjusted a dial, then quietly flipped the chart page backward. The paper made a soft whispering sound like something being revealed. His heart rate spiked this morning, she said. Could have been pain or awareness. Her eyes stayed on the page, but her meaning reached all three of them. Awareness? Sophie repeated. Clara nodded, still reading. It happens. Patients hear more than we assume. I could feel Mark stiffen beside the bed. After a moment, Clara tore off a narrow strip from one of the machines, a printout of the morning's heart rate pattern, and clipped it to the chart for Dr. Lewis to review. The tiny peaks and dips told a story only I truly understood as they all stepped back. I realized something important. The doctor's words had changed the timeline. Their plan was no longer ahead, was slipping from their grip, and with every new report, every chart update, every recorded spike, the truth was closing in on them. By the time the room settled into silence again, I knew the next chapter of this ordeal wouldn't be about observation anymore. It would be about strategy. I didn't open my eyes when Emma walked in, but I felt something shift in the room. Some people bring tension when they arrive. Others bring truth. The afternoon sun leaked into the room in soft stripes, filtered through the blinds like thin ribbons of warmth. After hours of cold, fluorescent light, the warmth felt almost human, and Emma always seemed to carry that same kind of warmth with her. Even her footsteps were different, lighter, hesitant yet steady. They didn't scrape or rush. They entered gently, as if she was apologizing to the floor for making it feel her weight. She sat down beside my bed, the chair giving its usual tired creak. Not a sound of discomfort, just a small, familiar protest. The kind of sound that meant she had been here many times already. She sighed softly as she settled, and her fingers hovered near my hand again. She did that often, moving close, then stopping, like she didn't want to disturb something fragile in me. I don't know if you can hear me, she whispered, but I'm here. Her voice carried a trembling honesty that Mark and Sophie hadn't shown in days. The door clicked behind her. I could tell immediately from the rhythm of the footsteps that it was Mark. Heavy steps. Confident steps. Steps that wanted to be heard, even when he tried to be quiet. What are you doing? He asked, lowering his voice. Talking to him? Emma replied calmly. Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. He needs rest, not chatter. Emma didn't flinch. And you need patience. Try it sometime. For a moment, I pictured them as Kidzima sitting beside me with crayons, Mark wanting my attention like it was a competition. Some things don't change. They just grow sharper with age. Sophie entered next. Her perfume was the first announcement, floral, rehearsed. Everything about her was rehearsed. Even the way she folded her arms. Even the way she tilted her head like she was constantly calculating angles. We should get lunch, she said. It's been a long morning, Hugo, Emma said. I'm not leaving him. Sophie gave a tight smile. You know, staying here all day isn't going to change anything. Emma stayed silent, and her silence said more than Sophie ever could. Mark stepped closer to the bed. Emma, come on. He can't hear you. Emma finally turned, her expression calm but edged with steel. You said that yesterday, and you were wrong. I felt something stir in my chest at her words. She didn't know I was awake, but her belief that I could hear them, that alone was enough to anchor me. They argued softly near the foot of the bed, their words slipping in and out of my awareness. I kept my breathing steady, even when their voices dug into me like slow, unnecessary reminders of what they were capable of. Then Emma did something that cut through the noise. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad. I heard the faint tear of paper as she wrote something down. When she finished, she slid the note onto the bedside drawer. Close to my hand, but not obvious, the paper made a soft whisper as it slid across the wood. A handwritten note. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Emma's handwriting always carried a kind of softness, letters, curved gently, not rushed, not sharp. Sophie noticed it instantly. What's that? She asked. Nothing for you, Emma said. But Sophie stepped forward anyway and lifted the tiny square of paper with 2 fingers. As if touching it too firmly would give away her curiosity, her eyes scanned it. Her expression tightened just enough for me to notice. Even without looking directly at her, she folded the note and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Why did you take that?" Emma asked. "I didn't want loose papers lying around," Sophie answered. Too quickly, loose papers. Another lie, wrapped in practicality. Mark cleared his throat. "Emma, we're going. Are you coming?" "No." Her voice didn't waver. They hesitated. Then the door opened and closed behind them, their exit sharp and irritated. Emma let out a breath she had been holding. The room softened again, like it exhaled with her. "I know you're fighting, Dad," she whispered. "Don't give up on me." This time her hand touched mine, not by accident, not by hesitation, but intentionally, firm, reassuring. A touch that felt like an anchor in a storm everyone else seemed eager to worsen. The paper note, now missing from the drawer, lingered in my mind. It wasn't just a message. It was evidence. Proof of intention. The kind of small detail that later becomes important as the monitor hummed beside me. I understood something quietly, almost painfully. Mark and Sophie weren't just planning. They were preparing. And Emma. She was the only one preparing for me. Not for what they wanted from me. The next chapter of this story wouldn't be about comfort anymore. It would be about pressure. I didn't know pressure could have a sound, till I heard my son discuss my signature like it was already on the page. That was the moment. I realized recovery wouldn't be my hardest battle. The air in the hospital room felt heavier that afternoon, almost humid, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the tension. I stayed perfectly still, eyes half closed, breaths shallow and pacing. The machine beside me ticked in steady intervals, each beep reminding me I was alive. And that they were waiting for something else. Mark entered first. Walking with that purposeful stride of his, the one that made every moment feel like a negotiation. Sophie followed a second later, a thin folder clutched under her arm. Her folders were becoming as predictable as her perfume. "Where's the doctor?" Mark muttered. "He'll be back soon," Sophie replied. "But we should go over this before he returns." Before he returns. Not before Dad wakes up. That detail said everything. Emma had stepped out to call Michael. The attorney leaving me alone with the two people whose intentions grew clearer by the hour. I kept my breathing calm, even as Sophie opened the folder and laid a few papers onto the rolling bedside table, with the precision of someone setting a trap. "This is just temporary," she whispered. "For practicality." Mark nodded, but his voice carried impatience. "We need decisions made. Bills, accounts, and the house again. Always the house." Sophie tapped the top page lightly. "We just need one signature. He's too weak to manage things." Too weak. I almost wished I had the strength to sit up and prove them wrong right then, but silence was still my advantage. The door creaked open, and a nurse passed by briefly, but didn't enter. Sophie lowered her voice instantly. Leaning closer to the bed, but not close enough to risk eye contact. "His recovery is unpredictable," she said. "And if we don't get this in place now, it'll drag on for months." Mark exhaled sharply. "Dad never organized anything." "Everything's complicated." It wasn't true. My affairs weren't disorganized. They were simply not his to control. Sophie lifted the paper, her fingers careful, deliberate. I heard the thin rustle as she smoothed it out on the table beside me. Even without looking at it directly, I understood what it was. A draft. Power of attorney form. Printed freshly, prepared quietly, and brought into the room like a weapon disguised as a solution. "We need Emma to understand this," Sophie said. "She's going to make things harder, or simply fair." Mark paced once, then stopped right beside my head. I felt his presence like a weight pressing into the air. "He wouldn't want everything stalled," he said. "We have to act." That was the moment Emma walked back in. She froze in the doorway when she saw them hovering over the documents. "What is that?" she asked. Sophie stepped in front of the papers quickly. Too quickly. "Just some information. Options." Emma set her jaw. "Options for what?" "For helping," Sophie replied, her tone sweet but brittle. Emma didn't move, didn't blink. "Show me." Sophie hesitated. Mark sighed loudly, a sound meant to dismiss her concern. Emma, don't make this dramatic. Then show me the papers. There was no defiance in her voice, just truth. Sometimes truth is louder than shouting. Reluctantly, Sophie turned the stack around. Emma picked up the top sheet, scanned the page, and her expression changed instantly. Color drained from her face. You're pushing for power of attorney, she said, voice low. Right now? While he's like this? Mark stepped forward. We're trying to be responsible, no, Emma replied. You're trying to take control. The tension in the room sharpened like a knife. Even lying still with my eyes closed, I could feel the shift. Sophie tried to explain, but the words stumbled out of her. It's temporary. Just until what? Emma asked. Until you decide what to sell. A silence fell so deep that even the machines seemed to soften their hum. Footsteps approached Dr. Lewis, returning. He entered without ceremony, his presence cutting through the tension like cool air. What's going on here? He asked. Mark straightened immediately. We're reviewing options for managing Dad's affairs. Dr. Lewis looked at him, then at Sophie, then at the papers. His expression didn't change, but his voice grew firm. Those documents are premature, he said, and unnecessary. Your father is showing strong neurological signs. There is no ethical or medical basis to transfer authority. Mark blinked, stunned. Sophie stepped back. Emma folded her arms. Thank you. Dr. Lewis clipped a new sheet onto the end of my Badea therapy progression order. A simple page, but one that shifted the power in the room. The doctor left. Sophie gathered the papers in silence. Mark clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing at the chart, the evidence that contradicted his narrative. Then he stormed out of the room. Sophie followed, the folder held tight under her arm like a retreating plan. Emma pulled her chair close to me again. Her hand found mine, warm, steady. Exactly the opposite of everything else. I stayed still, but inside. Something solid settled to place. They weren't giving up. They were regrouping, and the next move would be even more desperate. People reveal their real intentions at night when they think no one is listening, when the halls are quiet. And when the only witnesses are machines that never sleep, night in a hospital feels different from day. The air cools. The fluorescent lights fade to half power. Conversations turn into whispers. The only constant is the soft, alternating beeps that rise and fall like a mechanical heartbeat. It's the kind of stillness that makes truth louder. I had been pretending to sleep for hours. My body had grown stiff from the stillness, but I couldn't risk moving. Not when I sensed the shift in the atmosphere, when footsteps slowed near my door. When whispers drifted through the hallway, like threads of smoke. It was close to midnight when the door eased open. Sophie slipped in first, followed by Mark. The room wasn't dark, just dim enough for someone to believe an unconscious man couldn't see the world around him. They didn't turn on the lights. They didn't call my name. They moved like people who didn't want to be observed. Mark's voice cut through the silence. He's still out. Sophie stepped closer to the bed. I felt, rather than saw, her studying my face. Don't stare at him like that, Mark whispered sharply. I'm checking, she said. Checking what? If he's waking up, pause. A breath. A shift in the air. Then Sophie's voice softened, not gentle, but calculating. If he wakes up now, everything becomes complicated. Complicated? There was that word again. I was beginning to understand that in their language, complicated translated to inconvenient. Mark rubbed his temples. The doctor ruined everything earlier. He made Emma feel justified. She always feels justified, Sophie muttered. That's her problem. And yours? Mark asked. Sophie ignored the remark. Instead, she walked to the small cabinet beside my bed, the one where Emma sometimes left her notes, the one Sophie had reached into earlier. She opened the drawer quietly, looking for something I couldn't see. Nothing, she whispered. Of course nothing, Mark replied. Emma's not stupid. Sophie closed the drawer gently, then leaned closer to the monitors. The light from the screen lit her face in a pale blue wash. What about the accounts? Mark asked. They're still locked, Sophie answered. Without some form of authority, there's nothing we can do. She said it with a frustration that bordered on resentment. Authority, to them, it wasn't about caretaking. It was about access. Their voices shifted lower, but I understood the shape of their conversation. Lists, plans, contingencies. They were mapping out a future in which I existed only as an obstacle then. Unexpectedly, the door opened again. Nurse Clara stood there. Holding a digital tablet, her face lit softly by its glow. "What are you two doing here?" she asked. Her tone was calm, but it carried weight of quiet authority that didn't need volume. Mark straightened immediately. "We were just checking on Dad," he said. Clara glanced at the clock. "Visiting hours ended 2 hours ago. We just stepped in," Sophie replied. Clara didn't argue. She didn't need to. She walked past them and checked the monitor with practiced ease. As she adjusted something, she glanced subtly at me. Just a fraction of a second, enough to let me know she was aware. She turned to Mark and Sophie. "I'm making a note that you were here. For accuracy." Mark frowned. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's policy," Clara said simply. "Night visits get logged." Her tone wasn't confrontational, just factual enough to unsettle someone who knew their behavior needed hiding. She tapped on her tablet. The soft tapping of the digital pen echoed through the room. Tick, 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 tick. A night shift note. A written record of their presence. Small, procedural. "Dangerous to the right people." Mark cleared his throat. "We should go," as Clara replied. "You should." Sophie hesitated. "We'll come back in the morning. No rush," Clara said. "He'll be monitored." Something about the way she said monitored made Sophie freeze for half a beat. When they finally left, the room exhaled a silence that felt safer. Clara stood beside me for a moment. Watching the monitor, her voice almost a whisper. "Whatever they're planning, you're not alone in this." She placed the tablet back into its slot and dimmed the lights further before leaving. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. For the first time since all this started, I felt the smallest flicker of control returning, not because I could move, but because someone else had seen what I saw, heard what I heard. Mark and Sophie thought the night protected them. But nights have witnesses too. And the next chapter would prove that their plans weren't as hidden as they believed. I always believed courage showed up in loud moments, arguments, confrontations, decisions shouted across rooms. But that morning, courage arrived quietly, through my daughter's voice on a phone call she thought I couldn't hear. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The world outside the blinds was a soft gray, that in-between hour where nothing is truly awake but everything is waiting. My body felt heavier than usual. Hours of forced stillness will do that, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. Emma was sitting in the chair beside me. Legs pulled close, fingers wrapped around her phone like it was the only anchor she had left. She hadn't slept. I could tell by the way she blinked slowly, the way her shoulders curved inward. But even in exhaustion, she carried a quiet resolve that neither Mark nor Sophie understood. Her phone buzzed once, just once, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, stepped into the hallway, and lowered her voice to a near whisper. "Hi, Michael. It's me. I need to talk to you, Michael. My attorney." I felt something shift inside me, a small jolt of hope. Emma moved slightly away from the door. But the half-open space that had betrayed so much in the last few days now delivered something entirely different. "Protection. I don't trust Mark and Sophie," she whispered. "They're pushing documents, and they're doing it while Dad's weak." There was a pause. I couldn't hear Michael's words, but I knew his tone measured, steady, always 3 steps ahead. "Yes." "Exactly," Emma continued. "Power of attorney. They had forms with them yesterday. Freshly printed." Another pause. "No, he hasn't signed anything. I won't let him. But they're trying to isolate him." Hearing her defend me, hearing her fight for me, felt like a warm weight settling into my chest. Not heavy. Not painful. Steady. Emma lowered her voice even more. "Michael, can you come, please?" I need someone to see what's going on here. She listened, nodded, kept nodding. Double quotes. Yes, today. Thank you, she sighed, a long, tired exhale that said more than any words could. When she stepped back into the room, she closed the door gently behind her. It was the first time in days someone had closed it completely. She pulled her chair closer to my bed and rested, her forehead against her clasped hands. I'm trying, Dad, she whispered. I really am. A few minutes passed before the quiet broke again. The door swung open abruptly, no soft knock, no caution. Mark stepped in with a kind of restless irritation, followed by Sophie, whose expression was stretched tight with false concern. What were you doing outside? Mark asked. Calling a friend, Emma replied, without hesitation. You don't need to call anyone. Mark's tone was clipped. We're handling everything, no, Emma said. You're handling what benefits you. Sophie stepped forward. Emma, we're a family. We need to stay united. Emma turned sharply. Unity isn't built on secrets. Their silence was instant silent, not because they agreed, because they didn't know how to push past truth spoken so simply. Mark crossed his arms. We're not the villains here. Emma didn't argue. She just looked at him. And sometimes the right kind of silence is louder than accusation. The tension thickened until even the steady beeping of the monitor sounded cautious. Just then, Clara walked in to check the vitals. She sensed the tension immediately. Everything okay in here? No, Mark answered too fast. Everything's fine. Clara raised an eyebrow just slightly, but continued her task, her presence bringing a calmness the room desperately needed as she adjusted the monitor. Emma slipped her phone from her pocket. I heard the soft click of a screenshot being taken. A simple gesture, but a powerful one. The call log glowed on her screen. Michael Reed, -7 minutes, 14 seconds. Proof, attendant. A line in the sand. Emma tucked her phone away. Mark huffed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Emma stood straighter. No, you two are making it harder. I'm just protecting him. Those words, protecting him, settled into the room like a final truth neither Mark nor Sophie could argue with. Clara finished her check and gave Emma a small, knowing look before leaving. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence was thick, tight, stretching across the space like a wire ready to snap. Then Sophie said quietly, We'll discuss this later, and the two of them left the room, frustration echoing in their footsteps. When the door clicked shut, Emma took my hand gently. Michael's coming today, she whispered. You're not alone, Dad, I promise. And for the first time since I woke to betrayal, I believed her. The next chapter wouldn't be about listening, it would be about consequences. I knew the air in the room would change the moment Michael arrived. Some people walk into a space quietly, but their presence carries more weight than anyone shouting. Morning sunlight angled through the blinds, cutting the room into pale gold stripes. I kept my eyes half closed, pretending to drift in some quiet place, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. The tension of yesterday still clung to the walls like humidity. Emma had been pacing softly, checking the hallway every few minutes, as if waiting for someone. Then it happened. A set of footsteps stopped outside my door. Not rushed. Not hesitant, measured, confident. They belonged to someone used to walking into difficult rooms, Michael Reed, even from the bed. With my eyes closed, I could feel the shift like gravity recognizing someone else with weight. Emma opened the door before he could knock. Her voice dropped to a relieved whisper. Thank you for coming. Michael stepped inside, but only just. He remained near the doorway, assessing the room the way he always assessed a legal case. Quiet first, analysis second, action third. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He wore a simple gray suit, practical shoes, and glasses he only adjusted when thinking. But when he scanned a room, he made people rethink their choices. What's the situation? He asked. Emma hesitated for a moment and nodded toward the end of my bed where the blank power of attorney papers had been ours before. They're pushing for control. Hard. Just as she finished speaking, two more silhouettes approached the door. Mark and Sophie, of course. Michael stepped back into the hallway, choosing to face them there instead of pulling the tension into the room. I couldn't see them clearly, but the half-open door gave me enough the shadows, the tones, the tightening voices. Mark forced a polite smile. "Michael, we didn't expect you," I can tell, Michael replied smoothly. Sophie's tone was crisp. "We're just trying to manage the situation responsibly." Michael nodded once. "And I'm here to ensure it stays responsible." Mark folded his arms, trying to hide his irritation. "There's a lot to handle. Bills, decisions, property maintenance." Michael cut him off with a calm precision. "Your father prepared his affairs years ago. Nothing needs sudden intervention." The hallway fell silent. Even the ambient hospital sounds seemed to pause. As if listening, Emma stepped beside Michael, not behind him. But beside showing exactly where she stood, Sophie tried a softer tone. "We're not trying to take over, Michael. We're just thinking ahead." Michael raised a single eyebrow. "Thinking ahead usually doesn't require fresh legal documents brought into a hospital room without medical necessity." That one sentence landed like a stone dropped into water. Mark shifted. "We're looking out for him. Are you?" Michael asked. The question wasn't loud, but it stripped the air around them. I heard the faintest intake of breath, Emma's. The kind you make when someone finally says what you couldn't find words for. Michael pulled a slim folder from his briefcase in my folder. The one holding my original living will and estate instructions. "I'll be reviewing everything with the medical team," he said. "Until then, no new documents should be introduced." "Understood?" The silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was recognition. Recognition that their plan had just hit its first real barrier. Mark forced a swallow. "We just want what's best." "I know," Michael replied. "And I'm here to make sure best stays defined by Daniel, not by convenience." He stepped into the room fully now, closing the door behind him with a soft, intentional click. The sound of a boundary being set, Emma exhaled quiet relief. She sat by my side again. Michael approached the bed and studied me carefully, searching for signs of awareness. His voice softened as he spoke to Emma. "He's still in there. Look at his vitals." He tapped the edge of my chart with 2 fingers. A simple gesture, but the chart held a truth none of them could argue with. Michael placed the folder on the small table near my bed. The edges were worn from years of being stored, papers inside organized neatly in the order I'd chosen long before this illness began. "This protects him," he said. "For now, that's our foundation." Footsteps faded outside the door, Mark, and Sophie retreating quietly. Retreating with the discomfort of people who know they've been seen too clearly, Emma took my hand, her voice a soft tremor. "They won't push you around, Dad, not now?" I remained still, but inside something eased. A quiet shift. A breath I didn't know I was holding finally released. For the first time, the balance of power had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just with calm, documented truth. But the next chapter would show something important when people lose control. They don't give up, they get desperate. Sometimes the truth is already written. You just need the right person to read it aloud. The room felt different after Michael arrived. More grounded, more defined. Like someone had finally drawn a clean line through the chaos. I stayed motionless, breathing slow, letting their voices and footsteps paint the picture for me. Michael placed my old folder, my living will, on the rolling bedside table. He opened it with the care of someone handling evidence, not paperwork. The sound of the metal clasp popping open seemed louder than it should have been. Emma stood beside him, arms folded, protective but controlled. Mark and Sophie hovered near the doorway, their silhouettes stiff and sharp in the soft hospital light. They looked like people who had practiced a reaction before entering the room. Calm faces stretched too tightly over rising frustration. Michael cleared his throat, flipping through pages that hadn't been touched in years. "Let's go over this," he said. "Since there seems to be confusion." "There's no confusion," Mark replied quickly. A little too quickly. "There is," Michael corrected gently. "But not on my end." He pulled out a single sheet-thick paper, crisp edges. The ink still dark after years of storage. "My original living will. It was signed 12 years ago," Michael said. and it clearly states that no transfer of authority, medical, financial, or legal can be executed unless Daniel is deemed permanently incapacitated by two independent physicians. Emma exhaled sharply, relief mixing with emotion. Sophie tilted her head, feigning curiosity. 12 years is old. Isn't it outdated? Michael slid his glasses down slightly, a gesture he reserved for moments when someone insulted his intelligence. Legal documents don't expire because they're old. They expire when they're replaced. And this one wasn't. Mark crossed his arms. Dad didn't expect this situation. He never planned for emergency care. Michael turned another page, slowly, decisively. He did. Clause 17. In the event of medical emergency, no financial or property-related decisions may be made without my express, conscious approval. The silence that followed was deep enough to feel. Emma blinked, surprised even though she trusted him. He really wrote that? He did, Michael said. Your father was thorough. A warmth spread through me at that word. Thorough. It was the way I approached building homes precise, patient, intentional. And now that same thoroughness was shielding me. Mark took a slow breath, masking his irritation. We're not trying to take advantage. We just want things to stay stable. Emma turned to him sharply. Stable for who? Sophie stepped in, strategically softening her voice. This isn't about benefit. It's about preparedness. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Preparedness doesn't require pressuring an unconscious patient with documents he cannot read. The word pressuring cracked something open in the room. Mark's jaw tightened. Sophie's hand froze halfway toward her folder. Michael placed the living, face up on the bedside table where everyone could see it. The signature, my signature, sat in the lower corner, steady and unmistakable. Legally. Michael continued, you cannot move forward with anything you attempted yesterday. Not property discussions. Not account access. Not signature requests. Mark swallowed. Hard. We weren't, you were, Emma said gently, but firmly. And it ends now. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the heart. Monitor beside me, steady, predictable, unlike them. Michael's voice softened. Daniel protected himself long before this moment. My job is simply to enforce the boundaries he already set. He slipped. The living will back into its folder and tap the top. With his finger a deliberate gesture. That felt almost ceremonial. Mark cleared his throat. Maybe we should update it. Sophie nodded quickly. Yes, that's reasonable. Given the circumstances, Michael didn't even blink. You cannot update a living will on someone else's behalf. But what if he? Sophie started. He can update it himself, Michael said calmly. When he's awake, when he can consent, when he can speak. The way he said when he's awake made something inside me tighten not in fear, but in anticipation. He knew, or at least suspected. Mark tried a different tactic. We're just trying to take care of things. Then start by respecting his instructions. It was the smoothest dismissal I'd ever heard. After a long, uncomfortable moment, Mark finally said, we'll talk later, and walked out. Sophie followed him with a quiet, controlled exhale. Emma sat down beside me again, brushing her thumb gently across my hand. You protected yourself, she whispered, even before you knew you needed to. I didn't move, but inside, something settled. Solid, steady. Michael glanced at me before leaving. Just a flicker of eye contact. Or maybe I imagined it. But the way he paused, it felt intentional as the door closed behind him. I knew one thing clearly. Their first plan had collapsed. Their second plan would be more desperate, and I needed to be ready. I used to think being helpless meant losing control. But lying in that bed, unable to speak, I learned something else. Helplessness is what other people try to create around you. The hours after. Michael left felt oddly quiet, like the room was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. I kept my eyes closed, but my mind was awake in every corner. Awareness had become my only weapon, and silence was its shield. Emma stayed with me until early afternoon. She paced, checked messages, stepped out to talk to a nurse, came back, sat down, rested her forehead against her hands, exhausted, determined, but steady. Every so often she touched my arm or adjusted my blanket, small gestures of presence that meant more to me than she knew. But when she left to grab a quick lunch, the atmosphere changed almost instantly. Mark arrived minutes later, as if he had been waiting in the hallway. Sophie followed, her steps measured and precise. They entered the room without knocking, without hesitation, without the softness people usually carry into a room with an unconscious patient. Mark looked around quickly and lowered his voice. "This is the only window we'll get." Window, the word sent a cold ripple through me. Sophie walked to the door and pushed it until it was nearly closed only, a sliver of light remaining. The opposite of the half-open door that had exposed their intentions earlier. This time, they wanted privacy, control, a sealed space where their plans could breathe. "He knows too much," Sophie whispered. Mark shook his head. "He doesn't know anything. He's unconscious. He might wake up soon. The doctor said he's improving." "So," Mark snapped. "So, once he's fully awake," Sophie continued, "we lose leverage. Leverage my life reduced to a bargaining chip." Mark stepped closer to the bed. I felt his gaze sweep over my face, searching for movement. I stayed perfectly still. "He didn't deserve even a flicker. We need to keep people out," he said. "Especially Emma," Sophie nodded. "She's calling attorneys, talking to nurses, watching everything." "Exactly," Mark said. "If she's here all day, she'll intercept every attempt we make. Attempts plural." Sophie pulled out a folded sheet of paper, her handwriting thin, controlled. A list. I couldn't see it, but I knew instantly what it was. A strategy. "She visits at predictable times," Sophie said. "Morning until lunch. Then back again for the evening. And when she's gone?" Mark asked. "That's when we act." It was strange hearing people talk about acting on someone who wasn't dead, who wasn't gone, who was lying right in front of them. Hearing every word, footsteps approached in the hallway. Sophie tucked the sheet away instantly, switching her expression into something softer. More performative, Clara walked in. Her presence had become a kind of quiet alarm calm. Steady, but sharp enough to cut through deception. "Oh," Sophie said brightly. "We were just checking on him." Clara didn't smile. Instead, she checked the 4 line, tapped the monitor once, and noticed the almost closed door. She pushed it fully open. "Hospital. Policy. Doors stay open unless medically required." The gesture seemed casual, but her eyes said otherwise. "Is everything all right?" Clara asked, voice neutral, but observant. "Yes," Mark said too quickly. Too rehearsed. Clara nodded slowly, then pulled out a pen from her pocket. She wrote something on a small pata detail I picked up only because the sound was distinct in the silence. A notation. Small and subtle. Family attempting closed-door visit. Unnecessary. Document behavior for shift report. To anyone else, it would look like ordinary nursing notes. But to me it was protection. Evidence. A crack of light in their carefully built darkness. Mark and Sophie stiffened, their confidence shrinking around the edges. Clara finished writing, tore the note from the pad with a quiet rip, and tucked it into the shift folder. She turned back to them. "Visiting hours ends soon. Try not to crowd the room." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a boundary. Mark exhaled sharply. "We're just trying to take care of things." "Take care of him," Clara corrected. "That's the only priority here." Sophie gave a thin smile. Of course, Clara didn't react. She stepped out, leaving the door wide open behind her. Mark cursed under his breath. "This is getting harder," he muttered. Sophie touched his arm. "Then we adjust." They left the room moments later, their footsteps clipped and frustrated. The door stayed open, exactly the way Clara intended, when the room finally settled into quiet again. I let myself breathe a little deeper. They were tightening. Their grip. But someone else had begun. Documenting it. and the next chapter would reveal just how far they were. Willing to go when desperation replaced strategy? It's strange what people say when they think you'll never read their messages again, and stranger still what they delete. The morning arrived with a thin layer of tension, the kind that settles over a room before anyone speaks. I sensed Emma before I heard her soft steps, tired breath, the gentle rustle of her jacket as she walked inside. She had barely slept, yet she looked more alert than yesterday, focused, guarded. Her phone buzzed with a short, sharp vibration. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and sighed. I couldn't see the message, but I could read her silence. Mark called twice last night. She whispered. I didn't answer. She sat beside me, fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. I know they're planning something else. I just don't know what. Her voice carried a quiet fear for me. Not of them. The door opened suddenly. Mark walked in with a false brightness that didn't match his eyes. Sophie followed, clutching her bag close, her movements unusually stiff. Morning, Mark said. Emma didn't respond. Sophie offered a tight smile. We wanted to check on him. See how he's doing today? Emma stood up. He's stable. And he doesn't need stress. Mark glanced at my face, searching again for signs of movement. I kept perfectly still. Then, casually, Sophie walked to the cabinet beside my bed. The cabinet where my phone had been placed days ago. She opened the drawer. Emma's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Nothing, Sophie replied. Just making sure things are tidy. There's clutter everywhere. It was a lie. A shallow one. Sophie took out my phone. My heart tightened. Emma stepped forward. Put that down. I'm just checking if there are any messages he needs to respond to, Sophie said smoothly. He's not responding to anything, Emma snapped. Give it back. But Sophie had already swiped her thumb across the screen, unlocking it with the code she must have learned without permission or stolen from a moment when I entered it months ago. The phone's screen lit up. A list of messages, notifications, missed calls, and then silence. Sophie stared at the screen. Then her thumb moved. One swipe up, another. A long pause, and a soft click, the unmistakable sound of something being deleted. Emma lunged forward. What did you do? Relax, Sophie said, stepping back. There were personal messages. He wouldn't want those lying around for anyone to see. Emma froze, shock shifting into anger. You deleted things on his phone? Are you insane? It's for his privacy, Sophie insisted, Mark added. We're trying to protect him. Their voices blended into a tangle of excuses, each one thinner than the last. Emma snatched the phone from Sophie's hand. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. Where are the messages from 2 days ago? The bank alerts. The text I sent him before he collapsed? They're gone. Sophie folded her arms. They weren't important. Emma's voice cracked. You don't decide that. Clara entered at that moment, drawn by the rising tension. Her eyes scanned the scene quickly. Emma holding the phone, Sophie tense, Mark restless. What's happening here? She asked. They were deleting his messages, Emma said, voice tight. Clara's expression didn't change, but something in her posture did. Her shoulders squared. Her eyes cooled. Give me the phone, she said calmly. Emma placed it in her hand. Clara navigated the settings with quick familiarity. There's an auto backup on this device. She tapped a few buttons. The deleted messages will still show up in the backup log. Sophie's face stiffened. Clara turned the screen toward Emma, displaying a neat list of entries. Backup log deleted. Items: 14 messages, 3 notifications. Timestamp: 9:42 a.m. Evidence: a digital fingerprint of the morning's intentions. Clara locked the phone and handed it back to Emma. I'll be documenting this. Mark bristled. We didn't do anything wrong. Clara wrote something on the tablet strapped to her arm. Deleting a patient's personal data without consent is inappropriate. I'll make note of it in the shift report. Sophie swallowed. You're overreacting, Clara said softly. I'm recording. The difference between those two words, overreacting and recording, was the difference between panic and accountability. Mark and Sophie backed away from the bed, retreating with the discomfort of people who suddenly realized someone else was watching when they left the room. The silence that followed felt heavy, but honest. Emma sat again beside me and took my hand gently. "They're scared, Dad," she whispered. "They know they crossed a line. And they know someone's finally paying attention." I stayed still, but inside, something shifted. The deleted messages were more than texts. They were proof of intent. And the next chapter would reveal that intent in a way they never expected. I chose to open my eyes at the exact moment their confidence peaked. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply, time morning arrived with a strange brightness, the kind that feels too sharp for a hospital room. The blinds were half open, letting in strips of sunlight that cut across my blanket like quiet golden markers. My body felt heavy, but my mind, my awareness had never been clearer. Emma sat beside me again, her head resting against the edge of the mattress, exhaustion wrapped around her like a second skin. She had fallen asleep, holding my wrist gently between her fingers, as if afraid that letting go might change something. I listened to her soft breathing, the distant hum of the hallway, and then the familiar, unwelcome rhythm of two voices approaching. Mark and Sophie, always together, always with a purpose. The door opened without a knock. "Is she asleep again?" Sophie whispered. Mark exhaled. "Good, we can talk freely." I kept my eyes closed. One last time. Sophie's shoes clicked softly as she walked to the foot of the bed. "The messages being backed up ruined everything," Mark muttered. "We just have to move faster. Before he wakes up." Before he wakes up. Those 4 words settled over the room like a final insult. Emma stirred slightly but didn't wake. Mark lowered his voice even more. "Once the doctor signs the transfer papers for extended care, we can—" He didn't finish his sentence, because Clara walked in. The air shifted instantly. Her presence was calm. But the undercurrent, the warning, was unmistakable. "You two are early," she said. "We're checking on him," Mark snapped. Clara ignored the irritation. She walked to my bedside, adjusting the 4-line with practiced hands. Then she paused. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. She leaned down close enough that Emma didn't stir, but close enough that her voice brushed against my awareness. "Daniel, if you can hear me, you're safe." Something inside me broke, not in pain, in relief. That was the moment. I decided the waiting was over. Clara turned to the monitor and tapped the screen. Checking the readout, my heartbeat spiked just slightly, just enough for her to see. Her eyes flickered with recognition. She stepped back, and I opened my eyes. Not slowly, not dramatically, just open. Emma woke instantly. "Dad." Her voice cracked on the second letter of the word. Mark froze. Sophie's mouth fell open. Clara smiled, not a big smile, just a quiet one, the kind reserved for people who understand they've witnessed something important. My vision was blurry at first, the light too bright, the faces too close, but I could see enough. Emma's eyes filled with tears, relief, fear, gratitude, all mixing together. Mark took a step back, as if someone had shoved him. Sophie straightened her posture, every muscle tightening. I swallowed, my throat dry and sandpaper rough. Speaking felt like lifting something heavy, but I forced one breath, then another. And then I whispered the first words I'd spoken since this ordeal began. I heard everything. 4 words, whispered, broken, but heavy enough to make Mark look away. The silence after that was almost physical, thick, heavy, suffocating. You could have dropped a pin in that room and heard it echo. Emma squeezed my hand gently. "You're awake," she whispered. "Dad, you're awake." I wanted to reassure her, but the effort to speak had drained me. Not entirely. Just enough to force silence again. Clara stepped forward, her voice controlled. "Let's give him space. He needs breathing room." Mark was the first to react. "He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying." Sophie nodded too fast. "It's the medication." "Hallucinations are common," Clara cut them off. "No, he's lucid, and he needs a calm environment." I shifted my gaze towards Sophie slow, Intentional. Her expression tightened enough to crack the mask she wore. Emma wiped her eyes, standing like a shield at my side. "You two need to leave," she said. "Now." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but the monitor beeped sharply, my heart rate rising from the stress. Clara stepped between us. "Out. Both of you." Her tone left no room for negotiation. When they finally left, the door shutting behind them with a satisfying click, the entire atmosphere changed. The room softened again. The light seemed less harsh. The air felt easier to breathe. Emma leaned close. "Dad, don't talk yet. Just rest. Michael's on his way." I blinked slowly in response. It was all I could manage, but it was enough. Emma understood. Clara documented my vitals, her voice gentle. "You chose the perfect moment to come back." I didn't respond. But inside, something steady anchored itself. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning of the truth, and the next chapter would prove that waking up was only step one. They expected weakness the moment I opened my eyes. What they didn't expect was clarity. The room felt heavier after the awakening, as if my single whispered sentence had rewired the atmosphere. Emma hovered close, her hand still wrapped around mine. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the door, afraid Mark or Sophie might return. My throat burned from the effort of speaking earlier. Words felt like stones I had to lift one by one. But even in silence, I felt stronger. Awareness had returned to my body like a slow, steady current warming frozen ground. Clara adjusted the bed slightly, raising my head so I could breathe easier. "Don't force yourself," she said. "Your body will catch up to your mind." Emma nodded. "Just rest, Dad. You don't have to talk yet." But talking wasn't optional anymore. Not with what I'd witnessed. Not with what they'd done, The soft knock came at the door. Mark stepped inside cautiously. Not with confidence, but calculation. Sophie followed, her expression falsely generalized, soft lips pressed into a patient smile. The performance had begun. Emma's posture stiffened instantly. "Dad," Mark said, approaching the bed. "We're so relieved you're awake." Sophie nodded earnestly. "We've been worried. The lie sat in the room like a sour smell. I watched them silently. Even that startled them. They weren't used to my eyes being open. Mark cleared his throat. "What you said earlier? You were overwhelmed. It's normal. Coming out of a state like that, people misinterpret things," Sophie added. "Yes. You might have heard sounds, voices. They weren't what you think." Emma stepped forward before I could respond. "Stop." He heard everything clearly. "And he remembers." Sophie put on a sympathetic expression. "Emma, you're emotional. You're projecting." Emma's jaw tightened. "You deleted his messages. You tried to get signatures. You talked about the house while he was lying here unable to move." Mark bristled. "That's not fair," Emma shot back. "It's also not untrue." The monitor beeped a little louder as my heart rate rose. Clara, hearing the change, stepped in immediately. "We're keeping this conversation short," she said. "No stress." Mark raised his hands. "We're not causing stress. We're trying to help him understand." Sophie leaned closer to me. "We don't want you confused, Daniel. You're recovering. Memories can get mixed. If I had the strength, I would have laughed." Clara moved closer to my bedside. "Let him speak when he's ready." Mark hesitated, then forced a smile. "Dad, can you tell us what you think you heard?" This was their trap. Push me to speak before my body was ready. Make me sound weak. Discredit my clarity. I opened my mouth slowly. A single breath. A word scraped out like gravel. "You." "Planned." Mark blinked. "Planned what?" I swallowed, forcing another word. "House." Emma stepped closer, her eyes wet. Sophie gave a soft gasp. "Oh, Daniel." No. "You misunderstood?" I raised a trembling hand just a few inches, but it was enough to silence her. Then, before anyone could twist the moment further, a new voice entered the doorway. Michael, he carried a thin manila folder and an expression of quiet authority. "Good morning," he said. I heard he's awake. Sophie stiffened. Mark swallowed hard. Michael approached my bed with measured calm. Daniel, I'm glad you're back with us. You don't have to strain yourself. I reviewed the situation. He turned to Mark and Sophie. I also reviewed the nurse's night reports. And something concerning came up. Clara stepped forward slightly, reinforcing his statement. Michael continued. Multiple staff members documented unusual behavior from both of you. Attempts to access his personal belongings. Closed-door visits. Discarded items. Mark stepped back. That's exaggerated. Michael opened the folder, revealing a printed sheet. This is a summary of the reports. Signed by 2 nurses and time-stamped. The landed like a hammer. Shift report. Witness. Documented. Not feelings facts. Sophie tried again. We were only trying to. Michael cut her off calmly. Your intentions were clear. And now they're in writing. Emma's shoulders loosened. For the first time in days, she looked like she could breathe. Mark's face tightened. This is ridiculous. We're family. Michael met his gaze. Family is not a license to manipulate. The room fell silent. I felt my voice gather again, not strength, just intention. I took a slow breath and whispered, Enough. Emma grabbed my hand gently. Dad, don't push yourself. Michael nodded. Save your energy. There's no rush. You're safe now. But I wasn't entirely safe, because as Mark and Sophie stepped out of the room, their faces had changed. Not defeated, not remorseful. Strategic there. First plan had failed. Their second had collapsed. But the look in their eyes said one thing clearly. A third plan was coming. When someone places a pen in your hand too quickly, it's never about helping you, it's about helping themselves. The morning after I woke up felt strangely fragile, like the room was made of thin glass and every word could crack it. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm linen. My body still felt heavy, but my mind, my awareness was sharp enough to notice everything. Emma was sitting beside me again, protective as ever. She kept glancing toward the door, expecting another ambush from Mark or Sophie. But for the first time in days, the hallway remained quiet. Too quiet. Quiet in a way that meant planning. Around mid-morning, the peace broke. The door swung open, and Sophie walked in with a kind of false confidence, tight smile. A neatly pressed blazer, and a folder hugged against her chest like something precious. Mark followed, pacing with nervous energy. Dad, Sophie said gently, we brought you some paperwork to look at. Just routine. Routine. That word held more poison than comfort. Emma stood immediately. No, absolutely not. He's barely awake. Mark raised his hands. It's nothing serious. Just discharge planning and home care forms. The hospital requires signatures. The doctor didn't mention anything, Emma replied. He was going to, Sophie said quickly. We're just getting ahead. Getting ahead. Their favorite phrase. Sophie opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. The sound of paper sliding against paper felt louder than the heart monitor. She placed the top form on the rolling table and gently pushed it toward my hand to close. Too eager. Here, she said sweetly. Just a small signature. It'll help us manage your needs. Michael walked into the room at that exact moment. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, the kind that erase every illusion when they arrive. He studied the scene, Sophie leaning toward me. Documents positioned for easy signing, Emma standing like a barrier, Mark hovering. What's that? Michael asked calmly. Sophie's smile stiffened. A home care authorization form. It's standard. Michael approached the table. May I? Sophie hesitated, but refusing him would have revealed too much. She stepped aside. Michael took the document and began reading. Slowly, thoroughly. His eyes paused halfway down the page. He frowned. Sophie, he said. Voice controlled. This isn't a home care form, Mark stiffened. What do you mean? Michael turned the page toward them. This section here, temporary transfer of financial decision-making for property maintenance. That's power of attorney language. My pulse ticked higher on the monitor. Emma noticed the spike and placed a calming hand on my arm. Sophie shifted her weight. That's just standard legal phrasing. It means we can manage bills while he's recovering. No, Michael said. This gives you access to accounts. It gives you control over the house. And it grants decision rights he never agreed to. It's temporary, Sophie insisted. Michael shook his head slowly. Temporary or not, it's hidden in a form labeled care authorization that is deceptive. Mark's voice rose. We're trying to help. Why is everyone acting like we're criminals? Emma stepped forward. Because you keep hiding things in papers meant to protect him. Sophie's jaw clenched. He needs support. We're offering it. Michael placed the document back onto the table. Offering support doesn't require hidden clauses. It requires honesty. The room fell quiet, heavy, humid, thick enough to breathe in. Sophie's mask slipped for the first time. Not fully. Just enough for her voice to reveal something colder. You don't understand the pressure we're under, she said. Michael turned to her. The only pressure here is the one you're creating. Emma folded her arms. Take your papers and go. But Sophie didn't reach for them. Instead, she stepped closer to me. Too close and spoke in a soft tone meant only for me. Daniel, you trust us, don't you? My throat was dry. Speaking felt like lifting something heavy. But I managed to whisper. No, it's just one word. But it carried the weight of days of betrayal. Sophie blinked. Stunned, Mark stepped back as if struck. For a moment, the room froze. Michael picked up the document, placed it into his folder, and snapped it shut. I'll be keeping this for legal review, Sophie's voice cracked. You can't do that. I already did, Michael replied. Emma moved beside him, her presence protective and steady. Clara entered behind them, drawn by the rising heart rate alarm. What's happening in here? She asked. Michael handed her the folder. Hidden clauses in a supposed care form. I'll be filing this with administration. Clara's expression hardened. Understood. Mark grabbed Sophie's arm. Let's go. They left without another word, their footsteps uneven, fractured, like their plan. As the door closed, Emma whispered, They really thought you'd sign it. I blinked slowly. A single heavy gesture. Michael stepped closer. This changes everything. We're going home soon. His voice carried certainty, but inside me, another feeling stirred. Not relief, not yet. Because if this was their second plan, their third would be more dangerous. The strange thing about returning home after a crisis is that nothing looks the way you left it, not because the house changed, but because you did. I closed my eyes, gathering strength for a moment, then whispered toward Emma, Still, trust. You. Her face crumpled not in sadness, but in something deeper. Loyalty. Love. Relief. Mark staggered back as if the sentence had pushed him. Sophie looked at the papers. At me. At Emma. And then at the doorway, calculating again, Emma placed the documents back into the folder, sealing them with quiet resolve. Dad, we'll protect this. This changes everything. Yes, it did, because this wasn't just paperwork. It was intent. It was history. It was truth resurfacing. At the exact moment I needed it, but something else happened to Asmark, and Sophie stood in the living room with the weight of those documents pressing down on them. I saw something. Dangerous spark behind their eyes. Their plan wasn't dead. It was shifting. And the next chapter would show exactly how far they were willing to go. Once cornered. The problem with people who plan behind closed doors is that they expect applause when the lights turn on. It happened an hour after the old documents resurfaced. The house had settled into a thin, fragile, quiet Tima, organizing the papers on the coffee table. Michael reviewing each page with the patience of a surgeon. I rested on the couch, still weak, but alert enough to feel the undercurrent in the air. Then came the knock. Rapid, sharp, strained. Emma looked at me, then at the doorway. She didn't need to guess who it was. Mark pushed the door open before she even reached it. Sophie followed close behind, her arms folded like she was bracing for impact. We need to talk, Mark announced. Not requested, not suggested, declared. Michael stepped between them and me, calm but firm. This isn't the time. It is, Sophie said, pushing forward. We're not leaving until we clear this up.
Emma
Crossed her arms. There's nothing to clear up. There is, Mark replied, his voice rising a notch. You've made us out to be villains. You did that yourselves, Emma shot back. Mark's jaw tightened. Dad doesn't understand what he signed years ago. He probably didn't even remember the addendum. Michael raised an eyebrow. You don't get to decide what he understood. Sophie stepped forward, her tone shifting into the polished clarity of someone preparing for argument. If this is going to be a fair discussion, everyone needs to sit down. Fair. A word they only used when fairness benefited them. Emma sat beside me on the couch, placing a steady hand on my arm. Michael moved to stand close, as if physically anchoring the room. Mark and Sophie took the two single chairs across from us, their posture rigid, their expressions sharpened. The family meeting had begun. Mark leaned forward. Dad, the documents you wrote years ago, those might not reflect what you want now. I stared at him, expression blank, but eyes sharp. He continued, life changes. Circumstances change. You need to think about what's realistic. Realistic. Another word they used when they meant beneficial, Emma responded quietly. He already thought about it. That's why he wrote everything down. Sophie injected herself into the moment. Emma, you don't understand the stress Mark is under. The business, the bills, the expectations. Michael cut her off gently. None of which entitles him to override his father's rights. Sophie's lips tightened. We're not overriding. We're guiding. Guidance, Michael said calmly. Does not involve hidden clauses in care documents. Her face flushed, briefly, but she recovered quickly. Mark redirected the conversation back toward me. Dad, do you really want to leave everything split? Even though I've handled more responsibility over the years? Emma blinked. Handled what responsibility? He hasn't asked you to handle anything.
But
Mark glared at her. I'm the one who visits. I'm the one who tries. Emma didn't raise her voice. Then why did you ask who gets the house while he was unconscious? The room dropped into a heavy silence. Sophie shifted nervously. Let's not dramatize. Michael reached into his case, pulled out a set of printed pages, and placed them on the coffee table. The header gleamed under the warm living room light. Nurse shift report, behavioral. Notes that landed like a quiet verdict. Mark's eyes darted to the pages. What is that? Documentation, Michael replied. From multiple nurses. Notes about deleted messages. Closed-door visits? Attempts to access personal belongings? Sophie scoffed. You can't use those. They're opinions, or timestamps, Michael corrected. And eyewitness observations. Mark's face flushed with anger. You're turning this into a trial. No, Emma said softly. You are? The conversation paused, suspended in the air like fog until Sophie exhaled sharply and stood. Fine, she said. You want honesty? Here it is. We're struggling. Mark's business took a hit. We're drowning in bills. The house would have helped us stabilize. But we didn't want to ask for charity, so we tried to handle it quietly. Emma stared at her. You mean secretly? Sophie's silence was answer enough. Mark ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. We thought, if Dad wasn't improving, we could step in before things got worse. Worse for who? Emma asked quietly. He didn't answer. Michael closed the file. You've said enough. This meeting is over. Mark's breath hitched, anger turning to something more brittle. Dad, say something. You always said you trusted me. I drew in a long, slow breath. My voice was weak, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. I did, I whispered. Until you planned. Before I was gone, Mark's face crumpled not in apology, but in wounded ego. Sophie grabbed his arm. We're done here. He stood abruptly. But before leaving, Mark turned back, eyes sharp with something darker than frustration. This isn't over, he said. Then they walked out. The door shut softly, too softly for the anger behind it. Emma tightened her grip on my hand. Dad, what do we do now? Michael exhaled slowly. We prepare. Because the look in Mark's eyes wasn't defeat. It was warning. And the next chapter would reveal exactly what happens when someone who's cornered decides to fight back. Sometimes a single sentence can show you who a person really is. Not the sentence spoken in public, not the one said with a smile, but the one whispered. When they think you can't fight back, the house felt colder after the so-called family meeting. Not physically, but emotionally, like someone had replaced the warm air with a thin layer of ice. Emma stayed close, checking on me every few minutes. Michael sat at the dining table, reviewing the documents again with that same meticulous calm he carried everywhere. Mark and Sophie had left almost an hour ago, but their words still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. I rested, breathing slowly, forcing my body to recover enough for whatever came next. The doorbell rang. Not a polite chime, not an accidental press, a forceful, impatient ring. Emma stiffened. It's them. Michael stood. Let me handle it this time. He opened the door just enough to block the entrance with his body. Mark pushed his way in anyway. His face was flushed, eyes sharp with anger, frustration. And something else, desperation that had finally turned into something brittle. Sophie followed. Quieter, but tense. Her jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. This isn't over, Mark said without preamble. Not until I get answers. Emma stepped in front of him. We heard enough the first time. No, Mark insisted. Dad hasn't spoken clearly yet. I need to hear him say it. Michael held up a hand. You're not interrogating him. He's my father, Mark snapped. And mine, Emma said gently. But I'm not using that word like a weapon. Mark ignored her and walked straight toward me. His steps were uneven, his breathing sharp. The anger wasn't the dangerous part. The entitlement was. He stood beside the couch, staring down at me as if demanding loyalty. Dad, he said, voice trembling, did you really think we were trying to hurt you? I blinked slowly. Speaking wasn't easy, but I managed to quiet strained words. Yes, I did. The silence that followed was immediate and shattering. Mark's expression cracked not into sadness, but into disbelief, insult, ego shock. He stepped back as if the truth itself had shoved him. You're wrong, he whispered. You're completely wrong. Emma moved closer to me, protective. Michael stayed steady behind her. Sophie tried to salvage the moment. He's tired. He's confused. You're putting him on the spot, Emma turned to her. Stop pretending this is confusion. But Mark wasn't listening to anyone. His voice rose. I did everything for this family. I worked. I sacrificed. And you, he pointed at me sharply, you always favored her. Emma flinched. I closed my eyes briefly, the emotional weight heavier than the physical. Michael stepped forward. Mark, stop. No. Mark shouted. I need to hear it from him. Why her? Why not me? Why give her control? Emma shook her head, tears forming. This isn't about favoring. It's about trust. Mark's voice cracked again. Then why didn't he trust me? I forced my throat to work through the dryness and whispered, because. You planned. Before I was gone, he froze. His breathing changed, not softer, not commerged. Broken. He sat heavily in the armchair opposite me, running both hands over his face. I was scared, he muttered. Everything's falling apart. The business. The debts. I didn't know what else to do. Emma's voice softened. So you tried to take control. You didn't deny it. He simply lowered his hands and stared at the floor. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who once cried over a broken toy not because it was broken, but because he didn't know how to fix it. But he wasn't that boy anymore, and consequences weren't toys. Sophie placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll figure something out. Don't fall apart here. Her words were wrong, every syllable wrong. Not comforting. Not honest. Just strategy. Michael walked to the table and picked up a typed meeting summary, printed neatly with timestamps from the family meeting. He set it on the coffee table between us all. This, he said, is the record of everything that happened an hour ago. Your actions. Your words. The witnesses present. The paper lay there like a mirror reflecting what they wanted to deny. Mark stared at it, jaw rigid. Emma whispered, "This isn't how families treat each other." Mark whispered back, "Then maybe we're not a family anymore." The room froze. The sentence hung in the air sharp. Cutting, irreversible. Sophie squeezed his arm. "We're leaving," she said quietly. Mark didn't move immediately. He looked at Marile, looked tanned for one brief moment. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, resentment, and a kind of fractured love that had twisted into expectation. He stood. "This isn't the end," he said softly. "But I hear you." For the first time, he sounded less like someone plotting, and more like someone unraveling. They left without another word. The door clicked shut. Emma sat beside me, wiping her eyes. "Dad, I think he broke," Michael exhaled slowly. "Broken people make unpredictable choices." He was right, because breaking isn't the end. Breaking is the beginning of something else in the next chapter. Would reveal what Mark became after the last piece of denial shattered. Justice, when calm, is its own kind of thunder. It doesn't roar. It lands quietly. The silence afterward tells you everything. Mark's outburst lingered in the air long after he and Sophie left. The house, once filled with their noise and tension, now felt strangely open, like a window had finally been cracked to let in fresh air. Emma sat beside me, still shaken, still processing the weight of everything that had been said. Michael moved to the dining table in his unhurried, deliberate manner. He placed his briefcase down, opened it with a soft click, and took out a new stack of papers, clean, crisp, untouched. The edges caught the afternoon light. "Daniel," he said gently, "I think it's time." Emma looked at him. "Time for what?" Michael tapped the top sheet with the tip of his finger. "A new will. One that reflects today, not 20 years ago." The room stilled. Even my breath paused for a moment, not because I was afraid, but because true clarity comes with responsibility. Emma leaned closer to me. "Dad, if this is too much, we can wait." I shook my head slowly, weak but decisive. "No." "Today?" Michael nodded once, then pulled up a chair. He didn't rush me. He never rushed anyone. He watched my breathing, the way my hands trembled, the way my eyes followed his movements. He knew I was fragile physically but sharp mentally, and he trusted my clarity more than Mark ever had. "We'll go slowly," he said. "You tell me what you want." "All right." Emma moved behind him, ready to intervene if I needed rest. The process began, quietly, no drama, no raised voices, no manipulation. Just truth being translated into paper, Michael wrote, in small, precise strokes. Every letter felt like a shield. "I want." My voice cracked. I paused, swallowed, then continued. "Fair." Emma's eyes softened. "You always wanted that." Michael nodded. "Fair distribution? Equal rights? Mutual decision-making?" I blinked my confirmation. He wrote, "And protections?" he asked. Another blink, the pen moved again, and regarding unauthorized control, he continued. A tighter blink. He wrote a clause one he'd probably written before for others, but this time it carried a heavier purpose, a protective one. Emma watched every stroke of his pen like it was stitching the family back together, or stitching it apart more cleanly. After several minutes, Michael paused. "Daniel, there's one more question." He looked directly at me, not as an attorney, but as someone who had known my family for decades. "Do you want to restrict Mark and Sophie from making decisions on your behalf?" The question floated in the air, quiet, heavy, undeniable. Emma looked at me, silent but supportive. She didn't influence. She didn't pressure. She just stayed with me. I took a slow breath, then whispered, "Yes." Michael didn't react emotionally. He simply nodded. "Very well," he added the clause. A protective clause, a boundary clause, a truth clause, one that would change the future more than Mark realized. When he finished writing, he slid the papers gently onto the coffee table. aligning them perfectly with the edge. These, he said, now reflect your intentions as they are today. Clear, updated, unmistakable. The new will lay there like a calm weapon. Emma reached out, fingertips brushing the first page. It's beautiful, she whispered. Not the situation, but the clarity. I watched her read. Watched her shoulders relax as she saw what was written in black and white. Watched her understand the weight of what I'd chosen. Michael looked at me. When you're ready, we'll sign it. There's no rush. What matters is that the intent is captured. I nodded slowly. A few minutes passed in gentle, breathable silence. Then the front door creaked. Emma's head snapped up footsteps. Not unrushed, not angry, but deliberate. Mark stepped inside, alone. No Sophie. His eyes were red not from anger this time, but from something rawer, something quieter. He saw the documents on the table. His gaze fixed on them like he already knew what they were. He swallowed. You made a new will. Emma stepped protectively closer to me. Michael stood between us. Mark lifted his hands not aggressively, but almost in surrender. I'm not here to fight. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, vulnerability unfiltered by ego. I just want to know. What it says? Emma's voice tightened. Why? So you can change your strategy. Mark shook his head slowly. No, because I need to face what I did. Silence, heavy, fragile, unexpected. Michael didn't hand him the document, but he didn't stop him from sitting in the chair across from me either. Mark lowered himself into it like someone carrying a weight too big to hide. I'm listening, he said. Not demanding, not manipulating, just listening. A change. A small one, but real enough to shift the air. I looked at him, trying to see the boy he once was, and the man he'd become. And I whispered the words that would shape the next chapter. You'll know. Soon. His eyes softened. Emma exhaled. Michael closed the folder. Gently, the new will waited. The truth waited, and so did the final reckoning, because the next chapter wouldn't be about anger, it would be about consequences. I never raised my voice, not once, and somehow that silence shook them more than anger ever could. Evening settled over the house, painting long shadows across the floorboards. Emma drew the curtains halfway, letting a warm amber glow spill into the room. Michael remained by the dining table, hands resting on the folder that contained everything: my past, my intentions, my protection. I rested on the couch, still weak, but determined. Today wasn't about strength of body. It was about strength of truth. Mark sat across from me, shoulders slumped, hands clasped together. He looked older than he had that morning, aged not by time, but by consequence. Sophie appeared minutes later, stepping into the room with a careful, cautious, quiet. She stood behind him, as if unsure whether she belonged in the space. Emma stayed close to me, her presence soft but anchored. Michael cleared his throat gently. Let's begin. There was no meeting table, no court bench, just a living room where years of family memory hung on the walls, and where trust had been tested in ways none of us wished. Mark looked at me. Dad, whatever's in that will, I want to hear it from you, not from him. He nodded toward Michael, though without the bitterness he'd shown before. I took a slow, painful breath. Speaking required effort, but some truths deserved the weight of breath. You planned, I whispered. Before I was gone, Mark closed his eyes, the shame visible. I know, he whispered. I know, and I'm sorry. Sophie stepped forward. We made mistakes, but we're not monsters, Emma responded quietly. You didn't act like family. Michael opened the folder and pulled out a full packet neatly printed. Tabbed, organized. Before we continue, he said, you both need to see something. He laid the packet on the coffee table, facing Mark and Sophie. This, he said softly, is the complete evidence of everything that happened at the hospital. His tone was calm, not threatening, just factual. Night shift notes from multiple nurses, he continued. Behavioral logs, time stamps, deleted message backups, attempted document entries. Sophie's breath hitched. Mark leaned forward, jaw tightening. I didn't mean to. Michael cut him off gently. Intent matters, but so does action. Your father deserves the truth, not excuses. Mark ran a shaking hand across his face. I messed up. I know. I was terrified. My business is falling apart. We needed help, and I didn't want to. Beg, you didn't beg, Emma said. You tried to take... His shoulders sagged as if the truth itself weighed him down. Sophie tried to defend him. We didn't want to lose everything. We thought that he wouldn't wake up, Emma asked, voice sharp but trembling. Sophie froze. The silence that followed was painful, not explosive, but tight, like the house itself was listening. Then Michael spoke again. This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity and boundaries. He placed one final document on the table, thicker than the rest. The cover page read, Evidence Summary for Personal Record, the Ultimate. Mark stared at it with a mix of fear and understanding. So this is it? You're cutting me out? I forced my throat to work. No, he looked up sharply. Emma glanced at me, confused. Michael waited. I whispered slowly, carefully. I'm protecting myself? Mark blinked, tears gathering not of sadness but of realization. I'm not ending us, I whispered. I'm ending the part where you tried to control me. Silence, sharp, heavy, transforming, double quotes you. Still have a place, I whispered, but not the one you wanted. Mark covered his face with both hands. His voice was muffled, broken. I was scared, Dad. I didn't know what else to do. Emma's expression softened for the first time in days. Then say that. Not everything else. He lowered his hands. For the first time, his voice carried no pride, no entitlement. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. Sophie looked down, her voice barely audible. We lost ourselves in the panic. Michael nodded once. Apologies don't erase actions, but they can change what comes next. He turned to me. Daniel, is there anything you want to say before we finalize this? I looked at my son, the boy who used to bring me broken toys to fix. The man who thought he could fix his life by breaking mine. You hurt me, I whispered. But I still hope you find your way. Tears finally escaped him. Emma reached for the folder, protecting it, grounding the moment. Michael closed the packet. The decision is made. We move to signing tomorrow, tonight. Rest. Mark stood slowly. Sophie guided him, her hand light but steady on his back. They walked to the door, not defeated, but transformed in a way only truth can force. Before leaving, Mark turned around. Dad, he said quietly, thank you for not giving up on me. I blinked at him, my quiet yes, and then they were gone. Emma sat beside me, head resting on my shoulder. Dad, tomorrow changes everything. She was right, because the next chapter wasn't about confrontation, it was about closure. In the end, the moment that mattered wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a pen touching paper and the quiet understanding that I had survived something far bigger than illness. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds, brushing soft gold across the living room. The house felt different, lighter, like a storm had passed during the night and left the air washed clean. Emma made tea in the kitchen, moving slowly, carefully. Still protective, but with a softness we hadn't felt in days. Michael sat at the dining table, reviewing the final draft of the will with a calm concentration that made the room feel secure. His presence had become a kind of anchor, steady, immovable, quietly protective. I rested on the couch, breathing easier than I had in weeks. My strength wasn't fully back, but something deeper had returned. My voice, my choices, my ownership of my life. Today wasn't about conflict. It was about conclusion. A soft knock sounded at the door. Emma opened it, and Mark stepped inside alone again. His posture was different from every other day we'd seen him. Shoulders not squared. Hands not balled into fists. No agenda in his steps. Just a quiet, humbled presence, Morning, he said. Emma nodded, gentle but cautious. Morning. Out. He approached slowly, eyes meeting mine with something closer to sincerity than I'd seen in years. I didn't sleep, he admitted. I kept thinking about what I said, and what I did. Emma returned to the kitchen to give us space. Michael remained where he was, but he didn't interfere. Mark pulled a chair closer to me and sat, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I didn't see what I already had. I blinked slowly. He continued, voice trembling. I never wanted to become someone you feared, I whispered. I didn't. Fear you, I feared. Your choices, he nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. And that's worse. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was healing. Heavy, necessary. He took a shaking breath. Whatever you put in, that will. I'll respect it, completely. I studied him for a long moment. Weak as I was, I wanted him to feel not punishment, but a path, a chance, a way forward. Be better, I whispered. Start. Now the tears fell, then real ones. Not defensive, not manipulative. Just human. Emma returned with tea, placing a cup in front of him. We all start over today, she said softly. Michael stood and carried the documents over the full will. Signatures marked, flagged and ready. This, he said, placing it on the table before me, is the final version. Clear, fair, and protective. All it needs is your signature. The signing waited like the final quiet heartbeat of a long journey. Mark watched. Not with bitterness or panic, but with acceptance. Emma placed a pillow behind my back, lifting me gently to help me sit upright. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen. Not from fear. From the weight of closure, Michael held the pages steady. Emma steadied my wrist. Mark stayed silent. His eyes lowered, not in shame now, but in respect. I signed. The pen glided slowly, forming letters that didn't look as strong as they once did, but carried more power than ever before. Each stroke was a boundary. Each letter was a truth set free. When I finished, Michael gathered the papers, pressing them neatly into the folder with a final, deliberate tap. It's done, he said. Emma exhaled shakily and leaned her forehead against my shoulder. You did it, Dad. Mark wiped his eyes discreetly. I'll do better. I promise. I looked at him, my son, flawed, hurting, learning, and whispered the last words I needed him to hear. Then, start by staying. He froze. You want me to stay? I nodded, slowly, deliberately. He sat back down, tears falling quietly. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension in the room. Just family, fragile, imperfect, real. Emma reached over and took Mark's hand. He didn't pull away. Michael packed up his briefcase, giving us space. I'll file everything this afternoon, he said. You're protected now. It's protected. A word I had earned the hard way, as the morning light warmed the room and the smell of fresh tea filled the air. I realized something. The documents weren't just legal shields. They were a reminder that truth, when written clearly and held firmly, can rebuild what fear and desperation tried to destroy. I leaned back, letting the weight of everything finally lift. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of survival. A story where paper beat drama every time. And in that quiet living room, with my children beside me, not perfect but present, I finally felt something I hadn't felt since the day I collapsed in that hospital room. Peace.